So if you guys didn't see the interview that I did with my mom on this channel, go check that video out, man, because I had asked her about some experiences that she had growing up on the west side of Chicago, one of which was meeting the founder of the Stones, Chief Malik. He came over to her house for dinner, and she said he was one of the nicest guys that she had met, and he was really cool, and this was at a time when he was young, when he was like late teens, early 20s. But he, by that time, already was kind of known, and he had started this gang that, eventually it changed identities several different times. But he eventually was locked up by the government, and his daughter is actually an activist here in Chicago. Her name is Amina. Shout out to Amina, man. She was one of the violence interrupters. She's done a lot of anti-violence work. She's been helping to mediate gang conflicts with a lot of the other people, activists in the community, in a way that has a direct impact. Actually getting out on the ground, talking to these gang members and beating these streets and trying to, stop just sometimes the small arguments that lead to these big murders. The media is reporting that the former Chicago gang boss, Jeff Ford, who's also known as Chief Malik, has lost his First Step Act bid for freedom after 40 years in prison. So they said they convicted of offering to bomb U.S. buildings for $2 million in ordering the murder of a rival drug dealer. The 76-year-old founder of what was back then known as the El Rukns was denied release under legislation allowing judges to consider compassionate release for aging inmates. So I had did a video on a gang called the Rebels, which is actually a white gang, but I reported on the incident where they had started beef with a gang called the Blackstone Raiders, and that was really how it started. And it, like I said, it changed identity several different times. And the point when the government was really going at them, they were called the El Rukns. So anyways, the last time Jeff Fort was seen outside of a prison walls, they're saying, was during the late 80s, when he was the defiant leader of one of Chicago's most violent street gangs, who once offered to commit terrorist acts for a Libyan dictator. But after nearly 40 years in virtual solitary confinement in a federal Supermax prison, the 76-year-old Fort has appealed for leniency, saying that he's an ailing grandfather who wants to be with his family. So earlier this year, he sent a handwritten plea to a federal judge in Chicago under the First Step Act, which allows sentences to be reduced for elderly or ill prisoners. So they said, given the length of time the defendant has been in custody, much of his immediate family is deceased. Fort wrote that in handwriting, with his own handwriting. He said, defendant wishes to take the time to rekindle his personal relationship with his children and forge a new relationship with his grandchildren who were born after his incarceration. So that's one of the toughest things about being locked up. You're losing family members on the outside, you're gaining new family members. And, like I said, you can't be there for the family members that you knew when you were still on the outside. You had kids or whatever, they could be around different people and you can't be there with them. And for inmates, that's one of the toughest things, guys. And it's one thing the guys need to think about before they commit crimes. But the U.S. District Judge tossed out his request, ruling that Fort deserved the 80-year sentence handed down in 1986 after his conviction for offering to bomb buildings in the United States in exchange for $2 million from Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. So as the judge noted, Fort had coordinated the Libya plot from inside of a Texas federal prison while serving time for drug trafficking, directing gang lieutenants during nearly daily calls to Chicago and the headquarters of his El Rukn gang. So Fort has spent most of that sentence in a maximum security prison in Florence, Colorado, and has almost no contact with other inmates or the outside world. At the request of prosecutors, he's been allowed access only to a phone to talk with his lawyers or immediate family. Now, one magazine had been reporting several years ago that he and Hoover had been given some more freedoms, and they had actually been seen eating lunch together. The former bosses of these two gangs were like eating lunch together over there, and apparently they had been allowed some more freedoms, but I don't know. Some of these reports, I don't know how accurate they are. So the judge said that he saw no reason to change things. He said Fort's willingness to kill indiscriminately and for profit mark him among the most dangerous of criminals, he said, and is one for whom the sentence reduction is entirely inappropriate. I have to say I disagree with the judge, because this was a long time ago. And, in his old age, I disagree. You guys can let me know what you think in the comment section, man, but I just disagree with the judge's decision. But he said that Fort has not been a disciplinary problem, and has completed many classes offered to prisoners are positive developments, to be sure, but they fall well short of assuring that the ruthless Al-Rukn Imam has morphed into a gentle grandpa who wants nothing more than to spend his remaining years with his grandchildren. That's according to the judge. And again, I just disagree. Age changes people. You know what I'm saying? Like, guys are not on the same stuff in their 70s that they were on in their 20s. They're just not. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you can see this behavior change across. It's one of the things I tell these young guys. Like, you're not going to be the same person when you're that age. But the stuff you're doing now could affect you at that age. You know what I'm saying? And you might reach some of these kids, but I don't know if it reaches all of them, man. But so to actually go free, Fort would also have to reduce a 75-year sentence that was handed out by a state judge for ordering the 1981 murder of a rival drug dealer. The judge's ruling saddened, but did not surprise his daughter, actress Amina Matthews, who has vowed to continue her father's fight for an early release from prison. He said, "My first priority is to reestablish communication with my father to make sure that he is okay. And COVID-19 restrictions, on top of the already strict Supermax security, have kept her from talking to her father since before the pandemic." He said, in his latest conversation with us, she said, "It was clear that he's in his right mind and he's strong and he's going to fight until the end to make sure that justice is on his side." Matthew said that her father is a charismatic community leader who could bring peace to the neighborhoods that he once ruled, a belief that she says is shared by residents of South and West Side neighborhoods plagued by gang violence. She says that if he was out, I believe the violence between African American communities and gunfire would be lessened. He said he was an educator, he is an educator, and he is still alive. So Fort's infamy once rivaled, they said, that of his gangland contemporary, Gangster Disciples founder Larry Hoover. Today, Hoover and Fort are locked up in the same federal prison, but even in virtual isolation in prison, Hoover remains something of a public figure. Fort, they said, has largely faded from view. Like Hoover, they said, Fort styled the Black Peace Donation as a community organization, providing programs that attracted support from some of the leading philanthropic organizations in the country. They said, but the city's record murder totals in the 1980s and 90s coincided with the peak of gang figures like Fort and Hoover. And this is an interesting point that I've brought out in a lot of videos, when I kind of argue with people about, can the gang leaders, what caused the murder rate to go up was, some people say it was locking up the gang leaders. And I remind them that when the gang leaders were in control and when they were at the height of their power, the murder rate was at its highest. Okay, when these guys they were like kings in Chicago. I mean, the Hoover and Fort and some of the Vice Lord guys, these guys ruled the streets. And the murder rate then was higher than it is now. So, that argument, they would have to explain how, with the control that they had back then, like the absolute control with the structure still intact, these guys still following their commands, how the violence was worse than it is when everything fell apart. Because the violence did go down, not up, when stuff fell apart. It did. Like, the numbers are what they are. You know what I'm saying? Anybody that wants to can look at a graph of the murder rate from the late 1980s till now, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So, and this is before they went away. So, I mean, guys still have to answer for me that question. But I still believe they should be free, because at this point, I mean, they're old, It is, it is what it is. But anyways, both Hoover and Fort are seeking sentence reductions under the Federal First Step Act. And I hope, if Trump gets reelected, maybe he can free these guys. A 2018 legislative package that allowed judges to consider compassionate release for aging ill inmates serving long sentences. Members of Hoover's legal team included Jennifer Bonjean, an attorney whose client list has included Bill Cosby and R. Kelly. His plea for leniency was denied in 2021, but he has asked the judge to reconsider, though, like Ford, he also has a state prison term to complete, even if he's released from federal prison. So Fort has struggled for decades to find attorneys willing to work on his case. Fort drafted his own petition for compassionate release in February, as well as a separate petition asking the judge to allow a fellow Supermax inmate serving a 40-year sentence for sexually assaulting prisoners in a federal lockup in Alaska to assist with future filings. So Amina said they have him under the mountain, referring to the federal prison in Colorado. So other inmates there include Oklahoma City bomber Terry Nichols, mob boss James Marcello, who was a Chicago guy. He was a Chicago mafia guy. And the 9/11 plotter Zacharias Moussaoui. So they've got, mafia guys, they've got Al Qaeda guys, they've got, they got guys from all over the place, man. But only an attorney or his immediate family can visit Fort, and nobody has been able to make the trip once COVID-19 precautions locked down the prison, according to his daughter. Prison officials agreed that Fort met some of the criteria for compassionate release, but they denied his petition based on the nature of his charges and his leadership role in the Stones. They did. And see, this is the reason I think they should be free, because the gangs have changed since these guys were out. You know what I'm saying? Since these guys were in control, the structure's totally falling apart. There's no more. It would have to be their charisma, just like getting guys to follow them. It's a whole new generation now. It's been a couple generations like it passed since since these guys were in control. And to think that these guys are just going to run the gangs and hop right back into their position as leader and everybody's just going to follow what they say, is that theory I don't think has enough weight to merit keeping them in there. I think they should be free. But anyways, they did allow him more freedom of movement inside the prison and have given him more access to make phone calls, according to his daughter. So when he was able to move around a little was when he was able to get someone to help him, she said. Hoover was brought down by an investigation that initially targeted his gang activities related to running a drug trafficking operation, which is like the typical stuff for FBI agents and cops. But what federal agents heard when they tapped the phones over at the fort, which was the headquarters of the El Rukins, this was a shocking thing that they heard. It was not just ordinary crimes. Fort was serving a drug trafficking sentence at a federal prison in Texas, and he was making daily collect phone calls to Chicago. He was coordinating not only the stuff that was going on with the El Rukins on the south side, but he was also plotting an elaborate plan for the El Rukins to commit acts of domestic terror in exchange for $2.5 million from Muammar Gaddafi. So at the time, Gaddafi's government was providing clandestine support to groups in Palestine and even in Northern Ireland. And if you guys remember, the Irish they had the Irish Republican Army. They were doing some similar type of activities against the British. The Irish were in a long conflict with the British, which still it goes on to this day as far as politics, but they were doing like violent stuff against the British in the streets back then. The Irish were. And that's a pretty well-known conflict. In my generation, that was like a hot conflict, but it's kind of died down now. But Muammar Gaddafi was like indirectly involved in that. So, and that was like a high-profile thing going on, on the streets of Europe. So Gaddafi was the U.S. government saw him as like an op. So Fort's 1986 indictment was handed up just weeks after President Ronald Reagan had ordered U.S. airstrikes inside of Libya because of Gaddafi's reported support for the perpetrators of a bomb attack at a Berlin nightclub. So that was something that happened in Germany. But while Fort had converted to Islam and added elements of the Muslim faith to the gang's message of empowerment, police believed that the tilt towards religion was intended to make it harder for law enforcement to get search warrants and wiretaps approved. That's according to Patrick Deedy, who's a former federal prosecutor who helped build the case against the El Rukin leaders. So he was thinking, the cops were thinking the whole thing towards Islam was kind of a finesse. I don't know about that. I kind of disagree. Because some of these stones were really they were really like solid Muslims. Now others were not. I know of stones that are not Muslim. At all. Matter of fact, I followed one stone on social media, pretty high profile guy. He's a rapper, a Black P Stone rapper from the north side, and he was posting pictures of Jesus, like talking about Christianity on his thing, and the stones are Muslim. So in this day and age, a lot of them, they don't do that. Now, I know Muslims also believe Jesus was a prophet, but this rapper was not doing that. He was like talking about, like from a Christian perspective, and he's a stone. Or at least I think he's a stone. He claims a stone set. So they were saying that he sent his emissaries globetrotting for meetings in Libya and in a Libyan embassy in Panama to negotiate the $2.5 million payout. So this is some kind of deep stuff they're talking about here. The government guy said he admits he doesn't know if Fort intended to carry out acts of terror or to just pocket the Libyans' money. But he said the gang seemed serious. In a sting operation, Al Rukin members bought what they thought was a working anti-tank rocket from an undercover FBI agent. So it's possible that the whole thing was a finesse and that, Chief Malik was just going to take the cash and not do anything. But like he said, these guys had bought this anti-tank rocket. So the charges against Ford and his top lieutenants marked the first time American citizens were charged with plotting acts of terrorism inside the United States. He said it was pretty unbelievable. And this guy's now a private attorney. He says this was all pre 9/11, and here we had concrete evidence of somebody planning acts of terror, blowing up buildings inside the United States. Don't think that the Al Rukins were political. I think they were mercenaries. I think they would have done it for money. So that's his theory. I don't know. I kind of disagree with this guy. Some of this stuff is far-fetched, but one reason that Fort may never walk free is that his case is not a particularly good one for those who support sentencing reform. The Federal First Step Act provisions largely target reducing prison time for nonviolent drug offenders. It was like really just insane. You get caught with cocaine and it was like you committed a murder. You know what I'm saying? So anyways, one reason that Fort may never walk free is because of that. His stuff was not nonviolent. It was violent or potentially violent stuff. So you guys let me know what you think in the comment section, man. Should Chief Malik, Jeff Fort be free? Would it set a legal precedent, for other guys who are accused of terrorism to set them free early? Guys perhaps would do something at an old age. Some of these Al-Qaeda guys or ISIS guys, you never know, like they might do something at an old age. So if they let Ford out, would that set a precedent that those guys can use in their cases? I don't know. Personally, I think Ford should be let out for the simple fact, like I said, the leaders have no control anymore. So they're not a threat in that respect. Like if Jeff Ford says, tells these 15, 17-year-old stones out here gangbanging that don't know any of the literature, never got jumped in, never had a violation, and all they rep is their neighborhood. And, this whole stone thing is just a name to them. Are they really going to step to his orders? You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's for the feds to, say that he could be the leader of the Stones again. It's like, nah, man. Everything in Chicago is different now. So you guys let me know what you think down in the comment section, man. Much respect to his daughter, man, Amina. Keep doing her thing, man, and keep trying. You never know. You might get a president that releases him, but so far it hasn't happened, guys. Your boy, Chicago News. I'm out.